Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about auto layout, and you'll soon realize that the oh boy part in the title is key. These are my handles if you're going to start some buzz on Twitter or app.net, and this is the roadmap. So we'll talk about a bit the history of layout, the good old frames approach, which is still valid nowadays, Spring&Struts, and then auto layout. So it's my first time at UIKonf, also because it's the first edition of UIKonf. I'll spend a few seconds to talk about me. Who am I? I'm a user experience designer and developer, mostly focused on iOS. I did some Android development in the past. I didn't like it much. And recently, I've happily started experimenting with the BlackBerry 10 platform. But enough about me. What about you? How many iOS developers? Yo, totally expected. Android developers? Somebody shy. Keep your hands up. Stand up. Get out. Kidding. Windows Phone developers? Same guy. BlackBerry, nobody. Well, web developers, come on. Okay, a few. Good to know. Right back on track. Well, there's a giveaway during this presentation. What's the prize? I'm talking about 2,300 pages full of very detailed tutorial about any framework in iOS, Passbook, iCloud, auto layout, and whatever you can imagine, which, by the way, is here. So I'm talking about hardware books. And in case somebody is falling asleep, I have something to throw at you. So how do you win the prize? Well, it's easy. I've sprinkled a few lyrics in the slides. They appear in this purple color. So whenever you see something purple, raise your hand and wait for me to call you. And then you can try to guess the title of the song. And of course, if you guess it correctly, that's a +1. And in the end, the guy with the highest number wins. Easy. But let's see if you get it. So this doesn't count for the final prize, but let's do a test. Ready, set, go. That one, yeah? Friday? No, today's not Friday. The Clash, right? You want to think about that? Should I present again tomorrow? So you want to? No. I think I can go on. You'll have, sorry? Yes, the Magnificent Seven. Yeah. But it doesn't count. Anyway, a round of applause. Back on track. A bit of history about the layout. Well, in the beginning, there was the iPhone 3. Everything was fine. One resolution, one form factor, that's all. Great. Then we had the iPad, so we probably started to spread a few if statements in our code to take into account a different device and resolution, but not a big deal. And then we had the retina, and here, again, not a big deal for developers, probably a much bigger deal for designers that had to scale up all the PSDs, and learn how to correctly name the exported assets. And then we also had the Retina iPad, again, not a big deal. Then suddenly somebody at the design department at Apple probably has been ironing too much, and a stretched version popped up. And here we were in the middle of the storm. We had to multiply all our if statements to take into account this new form factor and resolution. So, what is layout, first of all? Let's keep it simple. So it's something that has to do with position and size of each component of your user interface. Layout is not something new. I mean, probably people in the caves have had a layout problem. Where do we put the kitchen? Where do we put the bedroom? That's a layout problem. When you build a mall, where do I put the parking? How do I structure that? I mean, 1 floor, 2 floors, stuff like that. Web people have had the problem of layout since the beginning. And they came up with the CSS, which in spite of the name, which stands for Cascading Style Sheet, it's not just supposed to style components, but also build layouts. So for example, there's this website called Media Queries, and it shows every day new ways in which web developers have solved the problem of different resolutions and form factors. You're probably familiar with the term web responsive design. I prefer adaptive or fluid. Anyway, the essence is the same. You have different devices with different form factors and resolution, and your content, your UI, has to adapt. And you can also have some fun. Well, in the beginning, on iOS, there was the frame. And the frame was good. And it's still good. I mean, I use it every day. Probably not on the weekends, but I use it pretty much. We all know this CGRect make. We provide a few numbers. We get back a frame. We use that to build our views, buttons, and so on and so forth. If we want to manipulate the frame, okay, we have the hassle of extracting the frame, setting the properties, and then use the new frame to override the old one. Good again. If you want to play with centering, then you have the dot center property, which comes in handy. As an alternative to that, there's Spring&Struts. So Spring&Struts, aka autosizing mask, is built around the following question. How do I component, so UI button, UI view, and so on, change when my super view changes? So in Spring&Struts, which it's not so easy to pronounce, if you go quickly, like Spring&Struts, 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 anyway, you answer that question. Either in code or in interface builder, you answer that question. Every statement that you make about the layout is related to the super view. And we'll see in a few minutes that Autolayout disrupts this thing, allowing to express constraints between different components in different branches of the UI hierarchy. Spring&Struts, which appears more or less like this, as I said, you declare, in this case, an interface builder, how the view shrinks or modifies borders. Or, if you are into code, you have the dot auto-resizing mask. Let's go to Autolayout. Well, you might remember that a few years ago, when ARC was released, we had this nice help me to port my code to ARC procedure in Xcode. So it started a wizard detecting, release statements and stuff like that. So providing suggestions about how we should change the code to be ARC compliant. And I wondered why there's no such a thing like help me to port my code from Spring&Struts to Autolayout. Well, technically there is. We'll see that later. There is. I mean, under the hood, that happens. So Spring&Struts stuff, if Autolayout is on, can be translated in Autolayout constraints. But my point is that Autolayout requires a mental shift in the way you approach the development of a user interface layout. And it also impacts your life, if you like. You're just supposed to read this. This really happened a few days after I started playing with Autolayout. Well, the first thing is that you don't call setFrame anymore. If Autolayout is on, forget about frames. Just dev null frames. There are no frames anymore. Instead, you declare a layout. And what does that mean? Well, you express relations between elements, components, buttons, UI views, table views, and whatever. How does that work? Well, you have a bunch of constraints, and you put them in a machine. If you like a mincer or a grinder, and the machine starts and generates an output, meaning that for each component, you have, for example, the values of x, y, height, width, and so on and so forth. But what's in the machine? Well, linear equations. Linear equations that formulas ahead. We're getting in the tunnel of algebra. It will be quick and easy, bear with me, just a few minutes. Don't get scared. It's safe. Anyway, a linear equation appears like this. A, B, and C are constants. X and Y are variables for which we are looking for a value. So, for example, the answer to this is 1. X and Y are 1. Meaning that x equal 1 and y equal 1 may both make true this statement on the left. Whereas a bit more complex example, just one variable, in this case, the solution is 9. You want to venture an answer to this? Start the grinder in your brain, and you'll hopefully soon realize that it's impossible. There's no value for x that makes true that statement. And you'll stumble upon that if you use Autolayout. In fact, when you deal with linear equations, you end up in 3 cases. One solution, so that's the case you love. I mean, that's the one you want to chase, because in that case, you have a value in just one value for each variable. No solution, and here things get a bit tricky. I mean, you provided a set of constraints as an input, and there's no combination of values that satisfies that system of equations. Or multiple or infinite solutions, meaning that you're being ambiguous. So the system doesn't know how to solve that. So in the case of one solution, you probably want to sing something like, it's a group from the UK. Never heard of that. Don't worry. You'll have chances to guess more songs. Anyway, Over the Hills and Far Away, Led Zeppelin. Immediately go by in this song. In the case of no solution, well, you probably feel more like you. Sympathy for the Devil, Rolling Stones, so +2. Or in the case of infinite solution, you feel a bit more like yeah, you didn't raise your hand, but okay. Knocking on Heaven's Doors, Bob Dylan. Not the Guns N' Roses. And if you're not into algebra, geometry helps a lot in this case. So in the case of one solution, you end up more or less like this. You have 2 equations. They can be expressed as lines. You plot the lines in a graph. You look at the intersection point. That's the solution for the system, for this system made of 2 equations. In the case of no solution, you end up with 2 parallel lines, which by definition never intersect, so there's no solution. And in the case of infinite solution, it gets even more interesting, because you technically see just one line there, but even in the slice, there are 2. The point is that they are exactly one on top of the other, meaning that every single point on the line is a potential good solution for this system of equations. And you want to avoid that. So Autolayout is that kind of magic wand, or if you are into mathematics, it's an objective function that takes as input a set of equations, aka constraints, and generates value for each variable that provide a solution for that set of constraints. But the mincer, so the Autolayout, is a bit picky because it likes just one solution scenarios. And in the case of multiple solutions or infinite, you'll have an ambiguous layout message. A bit hidden, we'll see that, but you'll have it. In the case of no solution, you'll have conflicting constraints. So you might want to avoid the second and the third case. Moreover, there's no order in grinding. Much like when you put the coffee beans in the grinder, you don't know, unless you put them one at a time, you don't know which one goes in first. Here's the same. It doesn't matter the order in which you write your constraints in code, because that order is ignored, essentially. You have one way to influence the machinery behind Autolayout, and that's by means of priorities. So each constraint that you create, to each constraint, you can assign a priority from 1 to 1,000, and of course, the higher the number, the higher the priority. That's the only way you have to influence Autolayout. So let's dig into some interface builder. What we want to achieve as a result is something very simple. I mean, we have one view, the blue one, and one UI image view. We know it's squared, and we know that the top and the left margin are 20 points. So we're going to build something like this. So let's see. I happen to have Xcode open. So let's build a very simple project, single view project. Silly name. Let's go to Interface Builder, open the xib. And let's grab a UI image. I'll put it here. As I said, ouch, as we said 20, let's say 100. Don't have an image with me, so let's go with the red background, otherwise you don't see that. Build and run. Here we go. Simple. Okay, let's say that instead of a UI image view, we go for a UI view, because we might want to put some other subcomponent in this UI view. So again, 20, 100. 100. Don't need the background because it's white. Build and run. Uh-oh. Something's wrong. Well, you can say it's an Android application and ship it anyway. or you can find your way through this bug. By the way, remember we want also the landscape thing, so let's try to rotate. And even worse, but we have a kind of error in the console. So let's see that, because I want to show you that the console is getting more and more friendly. Pretty tiny, so I'll read that for you. Unable to simultaneously satisfy constraints. New line. Probably at least one of the constraints in the following list is one you don't want. Try this. 1, look at each constraint and try to figure out which you don't expect. Find the code that added the unwanted constraint or constraints and fix it. So easy. So let's see. So I suspect well, first of all, we have this new guy here. So it says, a constraint is a first-class citizen. And By the way, yellow means that it's system added, and when you see a blue icon, it's user added. Anyway, I think I can solve that by deleting this one, because I don't need this one. I don't know who took the freedom to add it. So let's delete it. The delete key is working. No way to delete. The plot thickens. I see a list of constraints here. Let's delete is disabled. Let's try this promote to user constraint. Oh, that's blue. That's blue. Now I can probably delete it. Oh. Pop it back. Somebody talked about priorities. Let's try a priority. So I want this to be low, and also this to be low. Let's see. No way. So it turns out that, I'll explain that later. Here is something going on with the intrinsic content size. But anyway, the way to get out of this situation is to provide more details. So to create a new constraint related to height and width, which is pin, so pin height and pin, and I gotta select the view again, and pin with height, width, sorry. And this allows us to, now we are in a situation when we have too many constraints, so we for sure can get rid of both this and this, and now we're good to go, okay? And I was trying to build something very, very simple in this case. Let's go back to the slides. So it turns out that this scenario is, with those constraints, is under-specified. You need to be more descriptive with constraints. But enough with interface builder. Let's go to code a bit. So as I said, as iOS 6, a constraint is a first-class citizen, so you have a class. It's called NSLayout constraint, and you can use that to build constraints. So this is the way you build it. Ouch, I probably forgot this square bracket. Oh no, I forgot a parameter. Probably another one. Oh boy. Maybe there's one more. I'm not done yet. Here we go. So Apple came up with this lovely and so easy to remember method to create constraints. And just wait a few minutes because I need Xcode and to select each parameter to explain that, okay? And we are going to move to a more complex example. So in this case, we have a blue container and the white subview. We want it to stick it to the left and be half the size width-wise of the parent. I already have the code, so I don't need. And we have just 5 minutes. I wanted to show you a button example, but let's go just with the UI view. So here, I activated this part of code, which is cut. So let's try this way. So I'm creating a view. CDirect, I'm providing a frame. And here I'm calling this, as I mentioned before, this tells the compiler, I know what I'm doing. I'm sure that from now on, I'll do Autolayout. So don't bother translating any Spring&Struts stuff into Autolayout. All this in that method, of course, if you use no as a parameter. So I created this new view, I added as a subview, and I start to create a constraint, which goes like this. So which constraint are we talking about? Well, new element. Which attribute are we talking about? Left property. You have right, top, and so on and so forth. Which relation are we talking about? Equal, but don't worry, there's less than and greater than, and so on. What's the reference item in this case? Well, just the superview of the new element. Which attribute of the superview? Left property. While I'm at it, should I use some multiplier? In this case, we use 1, so we answer no. While I'm at it, should I use any constant? No, 0. And we add the constraint. And the same goes on for another constraint. So we're talking again about the new element instance. The bottom property has to be equal to the bottom of the superview multiplied by 1 plus 0. So I'll just need to comment out 2 constraints to show you that to simulate, again, an under-specified situation. Spinning beach ball. It's a pity we don't have a high retina beamer. And, where's the view in this case? If you stumble upon something like this, you might want to pause in the debugger and type, again, so simple, PO, bracket, UI, window, key, window, close one bracket, underscore, auto layout trace. And this, much like recursive description, prints out the hierarchy, but also tells you where you stumbled upon an ambiguous layout situation. I wish there were a different way, like, somebody punching in your face or some UI alert view popping up, but it's a bit hidden. So it turns out to solve this case, we got to go back and add 2 more constraints. One is this one. So we got to provide details about the width, which has to be equal to the width of the superview multiplied by 0.5, so divided by 2, and also provide details about the height. And if we build and run, then we get what we want. So going back to the slides, I'll talk quickly about the Zen approach, which is a third way to deal with auto layout. So that's the alternative. If you are into ASCII-Art, you'll probably like this. You have a special syntax to build a constraint. Notice that it returns an array, but don't worry because there's a method called add constraints. So by means of this syntax, you can do very cool stuff. So this, for example, says, vertically speaking, new element should have the same height of the superview, the pipe is the superview, but at the bottom, I want a margin of 100 points. This one, even cooler probably, you see here you express relations between siblings in this case. So I want a standard distance between these 2 buttons, vertically speaking, and in the case of buttons, the distance is 8 points. Or if you're not happy with the standard distance, you can provide your own constant. You have predicates. So you can say a button has to be at least 100 points wide. Wide because H is implicit. So if you don't specify either H or V in the beginning, H is implied. So here we're talking horizontally. You can have priorities. So you can assign a priority to a predicate, a constraint. So in this case, using the at, I'm saying that the priority is 500. You can combine predicates. So this has to be at least 80 and at most 120. And so on and so forth. I think I have 20 seconds for, no, I don't. Yeah, I do. Just to show you that animation kind of comes for free. Because here I'm going to show you 2 stages of auto layout. So here in view.did-load, I'm just creating a new view. Notice that I'm using 0 here. Whatever value I pass in here, it doesn't matter if you're using auto layout. I don't forget to call this. I create just my view, and I use the Zen approach because it's cool. And I have a button like this, very simple. The button triggers this animation, animate down, which adds a new constraint to my user interface. Again, so this is the button, and when I tap it, I trigger this piece of code, which essentially creates a new constraint, adds it, but also calls this layout if needed. So whenever you call layout if needed, it will go through the list of constraints and ask, did something change? Yes. Then I need to recalculate everything, and then pass the result to the display procedure, and then to the, first the update, and then the display procedure. And so we have a notification center-like animation like this, which also works horizontally. Like this. So, time is over. I want to mention just a quick alternative. It's not available in iOS 5. Autolayout is not available in iOS 5. So here is a library that might be helpful. This is my way, to kind of lock you, because you can't go home and say that you didn't get anything for what I said. At least you can say that you saw a guy that showed a slide with a huge font saying something like that. So don't think in terms of frame when you do auto layout. Should I use auto layout? Well, blow in the wind. I was tempted to close like this, but I'll close like this. Thank you very much.